Chocolate is one of the most trusted comfort foods in the world. It's sold as something simple, almost pure made from cocoa beans, cocoa butter, and a bit of sugar. Many consumers believe that if it says chocolate on the wrapper, it must follow that basic formula. But here's what most people never check: the ingredient list. Because when you do, a very different picture starts to emerge. Vegetable fats quietly replace cocoa butter. Cocoa powder stands in for real cocoa mass. Heavy alkalization stripping flavor and nutrients, then artificial flavorings added back to compensate. And all of it is happening legally under current food regulations. This isn't about panic. It's not about saying chocolate is bad. It's about understanding how modern industrial chocolate is made and how far some popular brands have drifted from what chocolate was traditionally meant to be. In this investigation, we'll break down 10 major chocolate brands, ranking them from worst to best, based on ingredients, processing, and transparencies, so you can see what you're really eating. The traditional standard, what chocolate should be to judge modern chocolate fairly, we first need a clear baseline. What chocolate is traditionally supposed to be? At its most basic level, real chocolate is made from cocoa mass, cocoa butter, and sugar. Cocoa mass comes from fermented, dried, roasted cacao beans that are ground into a thick paste. This paste naturally contains cocoa solids and cocoa butter, the fat that gives chocolate its signature melt, aroma release, and texture. In milk chocolate, milk solids are added, but the cocoa foundation remains essential. Historically, chocolate was never a complicated ingredient list. From early Mesoamerican cacao preparations to European chocolate making in the 18th and 19th centuries, improvements focused on processing techniques, not ingredient substitution. Innovations like conching and tempering refine texture and flavor without replacing cocoa itself. Modern regulations still reflect this idea. Both US and European standards define minimum cocoa requirements and distinguish chocolate made with cocoa butter from products that use alternative fats. These definitions exist because cocoa butter is not interchangeable. Its melting point, mouthfeel, and flavor-carrying properties are unique. When cocoa butter is replaced or cocoa mass is reduced, the product may still be legal, but it begins to move away from chocolate as it was traditionally understood. And that distinction matters when we evaluate what's on store shelves today. The industrial reality. What's actually in these chocolate brands? Now that we've established what chocolate should be, it's time to look at what it often is. This is where ingredient labels matter more than advertising, and where the gap between perception and reality becomes impossible to ignore. We're going to rank 10 widely sold chocolate brands from worst to best, not based on taste or popularity, but on ingredients, processing methods, and how closely each product aligns with the traditional chocolate standard. This is not about intent. These companies operate legally within regulatory frameworks, but legality doesn't always equal quality. Let's begin at the bottom. Number one, where's Palmer's? Palmer's products are a textbook example of what the industry calls compound chocolate. Unlike real chocolate, compound chocolate does not use cocoa butter as its primary fat. Instead, it relies on cheaper vegetable fats such as palm kernel oil. From a regulatory standpoint, this matters. Under EU law, products like this often cannot legally be labeled as chocolate. In the US, however, labeling loopholes allow phrases like chocolate-flavored or made with cocoa. Why is this done? Cost and stability. Vegetable fats are significantly cheaper than cocoa butter and far more resistant to heat. That's ideal for seasonal products meant to sit on shelves for months. But the trade-off is clear: waxy texture, muted flavor release, and a product that resembles chocolate more in appearance than in substance. #9. Hershey's is deeply embedded in American food culture. But its core chocolate bars reveal a formulation optimized for mass production rather than cocoa expression. In many Hershey's milk chocolate products, sugar is the first ingredient, followed by milk solids. Cocoa content is comparatively low, and the chocolate relies heavily on emulsifiers and standardized flavor profiles. Historically, Hershey's developed processes to stabilize milk chocolate at scale and engineering achievement. But those same processes result in a flavor that many outside the US describe as sharp or acidic, often masked with added flavoring systems. This is chocolate designed for consistency, not cocoa character. Number Y. Cadbury once represented a higher cocoa standard in the UK. Over time, Particularly after corporate restructuring, many core products shifted toward higher sugar and milk content, with cocoa playing a reduced role. Ingredient lists frequently show alkalized cocoa, which darkens color and smooths bitterness, but also reduces natural cocoa complexity. Texture is driven more by emulsifiers than cocoa butter quality. The branding still leans heavily on heritage. Formulation no longer fully does. Number why Mars products are engineered with remarkable precision? But that precision is aimed at palatability, shelf life, and global uniformity, not traditional chocolate standards. In many Mars bars, chocolate is just one component among caramel, nougat, and fillings. Cocoa content is relatively low, and flavor is carefully calibrated to remain mild and non-challenging. This isn't chocolate as a centerpiece. It's chocolate as a coating system. Nestle's chocolate products vary widely, but many mainstream bars rely more on cocoa powder than cocoa mass. That distinction matters. Cocoa powder provides color and bitterness, but lacks cocoa butter unless added back separately. This often leads to additional fat manipulation and emulsifiers used to recreate chocolate texture. Nestle emphasizes sustainability and sourcing initiatives, which are important, but ingredient composition still reflects industrial optimization over traditional formulation. Number way Ferrero occupies an interesting middle ground. Its branding suggests premium quality, but many products rely heavily on sugar, milk solids, and added fats, with cocoa taking a secondary role. Chocolatier is often part of a larger confection system. Hazelnut spreads, wafers, fillings. The cocoa flavor is intentionally mild, designed to appeal broadly rather than express origin or depth. Better than mass-market bars, but still far from traditional chocolate. Number Y. Lindt. Lindt represents a noticeable step up, as many of its bars use cocoa butter as the primary fat, and ingredient lists are generally cleaner. However, Lindt still relies on industrial alkalization and large-scale blending. Cocoa percentages are higher, but sourcing transparency varies by product line. This is refined industrial chocolate well-made but still optimized for scale. #3 Ghirardelli. Ghirardelli's higher cocoa products often feature shorter ingredient lists and better cocoa-to-sugar ratios. Cocoa mass plays a more prominent role, and the brand leans less on flavor masking. While still industrial, the formulation respects cocoa more than most mass-market competitors. Not artisanal, but closer. Number A. Green & Black's. Green & Black's prioritizes organic cocoa and cocoa butter with fewer additives and clearer labeling. Alkalization is limited, ingredient lists are restrained, and cocoa flavor is allowed to be assertive rather than engineered away. Still produced at scale, but with noticeably greater respect for traditional standards. #1 Best Tony's Chocolonely. Tony S stands out not because it is perfect, but because it adheres closely to what chocolate is supposed to be. Its bars use cocoa mass, cocoa butter, sugar, and minimal additional ingredients. Cocoa percentages are meaningful. Vegetable fat substitution is avoided, and sourcing practices are openly documented. This is chocolate where cocoa is the point, not a background note. What this ranking reveals is not good versus evil, or safe versus unsafe. It shows a spectrum of compromise from products that barely meet the spirit of chocolate to those that still respect its foundations. And now that we've seen the full landscape, the next step is to identify the worst offenders, the products that fail consumers. Most clearly through formulation and marketing, the brands to avoid, where chocolate fails the standard after examining ingredients, processing methods, and labeling practices, certain patterns become impossible to ignore. Some chocolate products, Dan, just drift away from traditional standards. They systematically replace cocoa with cheaper substitutes while maintaining the appearance of quality. These are the brands and product types consumers should approach with the most caution. Not because they're illegal or immediately unsafe, but because they represent the widest gap between what chocolate is marketed as and what it actually is. Let's be precise about why. 1. Palmer's compound chocolate disguised as the real thing. Palmer sits at the bottom for a clear reason. Its products often aren't tea chocolate by traditional or international standards. By replacing cocoa butter with vegetable fats, Palmer's creates a product that looks like chocolate, snaps like chocolate, but behaves very differently in the mouth. This substitution dramatically alters texture and flavor release, producing the waxy mouthfeel commonly associated with low-quality confectionery. What makes this problematic is not the ingredient choice itself, but how quietly it's presented. Many consumers never realize they're buying a fundamentally different product category. 2. Hershey's sugar-forward formulation. In many flagship Hershey's bars, sugar dominates the ingredient list, while cocoa plays a supporting role. This is legally acceptable under U.S. standards, but it represents a significant departure from chocolate's traditional balance. To maintain consistent flavor at scale, Hershey's relies heavily on processing and flavor standardization. The result is a product engineered for familiarity and shelf life, not cocoa quality. It's not deceptive by law, but it does reinforce a consumer expectation that chocolate is supposed to taste this way when historically it wasn't. 3. Cadbury heritage branding. Modern compromise. Cadbury's marketing still leans on its legacy, but ingredient lists tell a more modern story. Higher milk and sugar ratios, combined with alkalized cocoa, reduce cocoa intensity while preserving a dark, rich appearance. Emulsifiers compensate for texture lost through cocoa reduction. This is where branding becomes the problem. The name suggests tradition. The formulation reflects industrial efficiency. 4. Mars chocolate is a coating, not a core ingredient. In many Mars products, chocolate exists primarily as a delivery system for caramel, nougat, and fillings. Cocoa content is intentionally kept low to avoid bitterness and ensure mass appeal. From an engineering perspective, this makes sense. From a chocolate standpoint, it means cocoa is no longer central to the product's identity. These bars are confections first, chocolate second. Why these brands matter? None of these products are unsafe, none require recalls, and none violate food laws. But collectively, they illustrate how regulatory minimums can become marketing maximums. Key industry practices to be aware of: replacing cocoa butter with vegetable fats, using alkalized cocoa to mimic richness, letting sugar and milk dominate formulations, relying on branding to signal quality instead of ingredients over time. This reshapes consumer expectations. Chocolate becomes sweeter, flatter, more uniform and less connected to cocoa itself. The good news is that this isn't the whole market. There are products that adhere more closely to traditional chocolate standards, using cocoa butter, higher cocoa content, and fewer processing shortcuts. And that's where we turn next. The safe alternatives. Chocolate that stays closer to the standard after seeing where many mass-market products fall short. The natural question is, are there chocolates that still respect what chocolate is supposed to be? The answer is yes, but with important caveats. These are not perfect products, and this is not endorsement. What follows is an educational comparison brand that, based on publicly available ingredient lists and processing disclosures, remain closer to traditional chocolate standards than most mainstream alternatives. 1. Tony's Chocolonely. Tony's consistently ranks higher because its formulations are structurally simple. Cocoa mass, cocoa butter, sugar, minimal additional ingredients. Vegetable fat substitution is avoided, cocoa percentages are meaningful, and sourcing practices are openly documented. Texture is driven by cocoa butter, not emulsifier engineering. Trade-off: higher cost and less uniformity. That variability is actually a sign of less aggressive standardization, not a flaw. 2. Green and Blacks. Green and Blacks focuses on organic cocoa. Cocoa butter-based fat profiles, shorter ingredient lists, alkalization is limited, allowing cocoa flavor to remain more expressive even when that means bitterness or acidity some consumers aren't used to. This brand reflects a choice to preserve cocoa character rather than smooth it away. 3. Ghirardelli. Not all Ghirardelli bars qualify, but its higher percentage dark chocolate lines often do. Cocoa mass appears earlier in ingredient lists. Sugar is reduced relative to cocoa. Emulsifier use is restrained, still industrial. Still blended, but closer to traditional balance than most mass-market competitors. 4. Lindt occupies a middle ground. Some products rely heavily on alkalization and blending, but others maintain cocoa butter as the primary fat, higher cocoa percentages. Cleaner formulations. This is refined industrial chocolate. Not artisanal, but not purely engineered either. Where to find better chocolate? Specialty grocers, European imports, especially EU-labeled bars. Bean to bar producers, often local or small batch, the price reality real chocolate costs more for simple reasons. Cocoa butter's expensive fermentation and proper processing take time. Cocoa prices are volatile. Lower prices usually mean compromises, if they're in ingredients, processing, or both. The key takeaway isn't to buy a specific brand. It's to understand why these products are different, so you can recognize similar patterns elsewhere. Which brings us to the most important skill of all: knowing how to evaluate chocolate for yourself. Buyer's education. How to shop smart for real chocolate by this point. One thing should be clear: the most powerful tool a consumer has, ISNT, a brand name it S-label literacy. Chocolate is one of the most revealing foods when you know how to read the ingredient list. Start with the first 3 ingredients. Ingredients are listed by weight. In traditional chocolate, you should see cocoa mass, cocoa liquor, cocoa butter, sugar. If sugar is first, cocoa is secondary. That alone tells you how the product is engineered. Watch for fat substitutions. Red flags include vegetable fat, palm kernel oil, shea sow, or elite fats. When not clearly disclosed under EU rules, these fats are used to replace cocoa butter for cost and stability. The result may look like chocolate, but it won't behave like it. Understand cocoa terminology. Cocoa mass/liquor equals whole ground cocoa bean. Good cocoa powder equals solids only. Cocoa butter removed, limited alkalized Dutch processed cocoa equals darker color. Flatter flavor, reduced natural compounds. Dark color does not automatically mean high quality. Emulsifiers and flavorings. Small amounts of lecithin are common, but when texture and flavor rely heavily on additives, it usually signals aggressive processing. Natural flavor often exists to replace what processing removed. Certifications and labels. EU-labeled chocolate generally has stricter fat rules. Cocoa percentage is helpful, but not definitive. Short ingredient lists matter more than marketing claims. Ask one simple question: is this chocolate designed around cocoa or around cost and consistency? When you can answer that, you're no longer guessing, you're choosing. Conclusion: what this investigation shows is not that chocolate has become unsafe or that consumers have been deliberately misled by some hidden conspiracy. It shows something far more ordinary and far more important. Over time, the chocolate industry has optimized for scale, stability, and cost, and in doing so, many products have drifted away from what chocolate was traditionally meant to be. Cocoa butter has been replaced. Cocoa content has been reduced. Processing has been intensified. And marketing has stepped in to fill the gap between perception and reality. None of this is illegal. Much of it is allowed under current food regulations. But legality and quality are not the same thing. The responsibility here is shared. Manufacturers respond to price pressure and demand. Regulators define minimum standards. And consumers, often unknowingly, adapt their expectations to what's widely available. The good news is that transparency changes behavior. When consumers understand ingredient lists, fat substitutions, and processing methods, they gain real leverage. Demand shifts, standards rise, and companies adjust. Chocolate doesn't need to be mysterious. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be honest. If you value clear labeling, ingredient transparency, and evidence-based food investigations, consider subscribing. This channel exists to examine everyday foods calmly, carefully, and without hype, so you can make informed choices in a complex food system. Because the more we know what's in our food, the less power secrecy has.